Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm joined once again this afternoon by the Bureau of Meteorology's Dan Narramore and SES Acting Commissioner Dan Austin to bring you an operational update from the State Emergency Operations Centre, where all emergency services agencies are working around the clock to support local units on the ground in the Northern Rivers region and the mid-north coast to ensure that our communities get through what we think will be a difficult 24 to 36 hours. Significantly, Lismore is heading towards a predicted flood peak of 12 metres or perhaps a little higher. At the moment, it's 11.37 metres. And to put this into some form of perspective, before the record flood that we saw through Lismore just 1 month ago, the prior record for the Wilsons River was 12.17, the highest ever on record. So if not for that peak just 1 month ago, this in and of itself would be a record flood for the city of Lismore and that area. We currently have 16 evacuation orders in place as I walked into the room this afternoon. That is changing as it needs to as we find out more information about where this weather system is impacting communities. We also have 7 evacuation warnings in place presently, and collectively this is impacting around about 28,000 people at this time. The weather system is tracking south and areas of concern include many communities along the mid-north coast. The key message once again to our communities is that this is a rapidly evolving situation. The risks of riverine flooding, of flash flooding, of falling trees and power lines and landslips is very, very real at this time, and we're asking everyone please to take care during this time. Please stay up to date with all of the warnings as issued by the Bureau of Meteorology and the State Emergency Service. Please be ready to evacuate at short notice should we ask you to do so. And of course, please do not drive or even enter through floodwaters at this stage or at any stage. It's very, very dangerous for us to be doing that at this stage. We finally just ask you once again, please to follow the advice of all of the emergency services organisations. And on that note, I'll now hand over to Dean for the operational update from the Bureau of Meteorology.
Thank you, Minister, and good afternoon, everyone. There's a lot going on, and I'm going to cover it in the next few minutes. Starting in the north, we have major flooding on numerous rivers. We have major flooding occurring on the Wilsons, the Richmond, the Clarence, the Ballinger, and we've also got on the Arara River as well. As you just heard earlier, we predicted a flood peak around the 12 metre mark in Lismore later tonight as we move through, and the water levels are still rising through Lismore. Now, as we move further downstream, that water is going to impact Corrakai and Woodburn as we move into tomorrow morning, and they're both likely to experiencing major flooding as the water from the Richmond and the Wilsons River continues moving downstream, impacting those communities. Further south on the Clarence River, we've also got moderate to major flooding occurring on the Clarence River, and we're expecting major flooding to occur in the early morning hours in Grafton, and then continuing as we move later in the day, as we move to further communities downstream in the Clarence River. Now, as we move further down to around the Coffs Harbour area, where since 9 o'clock this morning, we've already seen 50 to 100 millimetres of rainfall on top of the 200 to 300 they saw in the 24 hours to 9 o'clock this morning. Now, because of that, we do have major flooding right now on the Ballinger River and on the Arara River as well. And communities on those rivers are right now experiencing major flooding, particularly around the Ballinger area and also further downstream. And we expect that to continue into tonight and tomorrow. Now a little bit further down as well, as we get into the Kalang, Nambucca and also the Macleay River, we're experiencing minor to moderate flooding on those rivers right now, and depending on how much rainfall occurs tonight into the early hours of tomorrow, we could see further rises on those rivers as well. And even further south around the Hastings River, we're also experiencing minor flooding as well, depending on the rainfall that occurs tonight and tomorrow. Now getting to that rainfall, a severe weather warning is current from Grafton all the way down into far northern parts of the Hunter. That does include Grafton, Coffs Harbour, Kempsey, Port Macquarie and numerous communities in between. We expect heavy rainfall to at times be very heavy to intense, with 6 hourly totals of 50 to 120 millimetres possible in just a few hours. Now these falls will be localised, but expected still to be a wet night for many parts of the the mid-north coast, and that's likely to see further river level rises on numerous rivers that I've mentioned earlier. On top of that, as the low moves further away, we've seen some pretty strong and gusty winds in the northern rivers, and that wind's going to increase as well through the mid-north coast and eventually for many coastal communities across much of coastal New South Wales. And these winds are likely to bring trees and power lines down, particularly for coastal communities or elevated areas. And of most concern, particularly our already saturated areas, are the northern rivers, but more so the mid-north coast and the Hunter, with all this rainfall combined with these strong and gusty winds, likely to bring down, trees and power lines, which can cause additional road closures and dangerous and hazardous driving conditions. So with all these warnings in place, once again, major flood warnings current on the Wilsons, the Richmond, the Clarence, the Orara and the Ballinger River, with moderate flood warnings current on the Kalang, Nambucca and Macleay area, with minor to moderate flooding also for numerous other rivers in the area. So if you live on these rivers currently experiencing or about to experience major flooding, please stay up to date with the latest forecasts and warnings via our website, app and social media, and listen to all advice from emergency services, particularly residents in the mid-north coast, as another wet night is on the way with widespread showers, possibly tending to isolated areas of heavy rainfall and localised thunderstorms, which we're already seeing right now around Nambucca Heads and up through the Coffs Harbour area, are likely to continue tonight into tomorrow. And then further south, as this low moves offshore, we're likely to see damaging surf develop across many of our coastal areas from Enid all the way up through the south coast, all the way up through to the Newcastle area, particularly on Thursday and Friday. So we have a damaging surf warning for many of our coastal communities and areas. Now we could see waves up to 5 metres, and this could go through Thursday and Friday, and that's likely to lead to coastal erosion, particularly on south-facing beaches, but also dangerous and hazardous conditions for any coastal activities. So please, as well, if you live on the coast in much of the New South Wales coast on Thursday and Friday, please be aware, obviously, dangerous and hazardous surf conditions and also possible coastal erosion and possible inundation on the high tide as well, with this surge of water coming in. So we could see coastal erosion and inundation of low-lying areas on the beach. So to reiterate, severe weather warnings current for heavy rainfall and damaging winds from Grafton all the way down to Foster. And we also have major flooding occurring on the Clarence, the Richmond, the Wilsons, the Orara and also the Ballinger River, with moderate flooding on the Kalang, Nambucca and Macleay rivers. Now these could increase further, highly dependent on how much rain occurs tonight and into tomorrow. So please, as always, be weather aware if you're in the mid-north coast tonight. Stay up to date with the latest forecasts and warnings by our website, app and social media. And as always, listen to all advice from emergency services. And with that, I'll hand you over to the Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you, Dean, and good afternoon, everybody. The New South Wales State Emergency Service, together with its partner agencies, has continued today to respond to significant flooding, flash flooding, and now also storm-related events from the weather conditions that are continuing to impact our northern and mid-north coast. Throughout the day, we've seen continued flash flooding in a variety of communities, and we've also seen riverine flooding, particularly in the northern rivers and the far north coast. As a result of this, the New South Wales SES has responded to over 55 flood rescues throughout the last 24 hours, and will continue to pre-position and move its resources around in response to the risk. We've seen conditions today that have also stopped our aviation assets being able to get into the air, such has the intense rainfall and the strong winds being in places. That in itself should be a warning to the community that these are very, very dangerous conditions moving forward, and that they need to be aware, and as we continue to say, need to monitor the situation in their area and understand the warnings and their local conditions to make timely and accurate decisions when to evacuate and when to move. We saw this morning the levee at Lismore overtop, and that flooding continues. And at this stage, we continue to respond to requests for assistance in and around the Lismore area, as well as areas such as Byron Bay and Ballina. The floodwaters are expected to move down the Wilsons and the Richmond River systems, where we will actually see significant flooding and major flooding occur over the next 24 to 36 hours as those waters move towards the coast. Communities in those areas, we know, are already stressed and are already worried from the previous flooding, and the SES has already moved additional resources into those locations to support those communities. Those floodwaters will continue to work their way to the coast, and over the coming days you'll see additional warnings as those risks start to be realised. In the mid-north coast, we have seen numerous warnings issued throughout the day as the situation has started to escalate. We have started to see high-level rainfall totals in parts of the mid-north coast, and there are numerous evacuation warnings and orders out right across that area. And together with those strong winds, we are now also seeing storm-related events as well. We ask the community to once again listen to the advice that downed power lines and trees are a danger to them and they need to stay away from them. We also ask that the community does not drive, walk or ride through floodwater, and that they look after their own well-being, and that they don't put themselves and that of rescuers at danger as well. We still have a number of days to go before we come out the end of this, and that we will continue to issue warnings as the situation changes across the state. We expect the system to work its way slowly south towards the Sydney metropolitan area and finally impact some of the south coast with some of the strong winds that we are seeing starting to occur across the north coast now. We have been preparing for that particular eventuality for a number of days. I would like to remind the community 132 500 for SES assistance and 000 for life-threatening emergencies. Thank you very much.
Questions? Yeah. Has there been any update on the missing woman in Lismore?
So we know it's a 55-year-old Narramore woman who was at Lismore working. She was recruited up there by a recruitment agency as an aged care nurse. She was driving a 2017 white Captiva at the time, so it was just before 10 p.m. last night that the call was received by an associate suggesting that she was trapped in floodwaters. It's been a coordinated search from the notification of that phone call, coordinated by the rescue. We've had Marine Area Command as well as SES volunteers. We had the general location of Wyralla Road south of Lismore, but we haven't been able to locate that vehicle or that person at the time. The search continues throughout the day. As you can appreciate, they are high floodwaters, so we'll continue that search.
Just for the Minister, we talked this morning about the rain gauges not working in Lismore. Had they been working, would the evacuation orders have still been removed?
That's a good question, which I might ask Acting Commissioner Daniel Austin to answer, particularly in relation to whether we're talking about river gauges or rain gauges, perhaps. Yeah, thank you.
So what we saw yesterday afternoon, in particular, was the river systems were starting to ease back. And as I said this morning, the river systems actually eased further once the evacuation order had actually been lifted. What we saw last night was flash flooding, which is very different to riverine flooding, and whether those gauges were working at that time would have made no difference to the impact of the severe rainfall event that occurred over the CBD of Lismore.
And the sirens haven't been fixed yet, so
The siren would have also made no difference. And you need to remember with the siren that the siren is the last in a chain of events. So as we discussed this morning, we've been warning now for a number of days of severe weather, that we continue to stand in press conferences like this, issue other warnings and media releases, and we continue to issue evacuation warnings and orders. There are a number of ways to get the information, and no one should ever rely on one source of information. So the siren is purely an indication that the levee itself has overtopped. Evacuation warnings and orders were issued ahead of that.
But is it fair to say, I mean, a lot of those people were sleeping when a lot of those warnings went in, the final ones. If they heard at 4:30 that the evacuation order's gone and they've gone to bed, it's fair for them to not have, checked their social media posts while they were sleeping?
So the initial messages went out much earlier in the afternoon, in the evening, than your 4:30 in the morning. So the initial notifications via text message and other things, and as we've been saying, people need to remain aware of their surroundings. As I said, the siren is the last in a chain of events that, under evacuation warnings and orders, people should have already left.
And just for the Minister, where does Resilience New South Wales fit into this? Now we're seeing this renewed flooding. I know when the flooding happened last month, there was a lot of discussion around what could have been done to prepare better. What are they doing in this current crisis?
Well, Resilience New South Wales are currently focused on ensuring that our 16 evacuation centres are stood up and able to look after people who are either the subject of an evacuation order and have been unable to find alternate safe accommodation, or people who just might need to have that additional security, even if they aren't the subject of an evacuation order at this time, if perhaps they are the subject of an evacuation warning, or perhaps they just are a little unsure about where they should be at this stage. Those evacuation centres have been stood up to receive people, to make sure that people can go there, they can feel safe. And that's a big role for Resilience to play at this time. And of course, they continue to work on the recovery efforts, many of which have been many programs of which have had to be paused for the next couple of days because of the unfolding circumstances. But when this weather event passes, the recovery centres, which have been so critical to seeing people in the aftermath of these events and ensuring that people get access to the help and the services that they need, they will be re-stood up. We are ready to go. We just need this current weather event to pass over. That is another critical piece of work that Resilience are leading. And of course, with respect to the Northern Rivers region, we have under the leadership of Police Deputy Commissioner Mal Lanyon, who is the Northern Regional Coordinator, where we are working through a number of different programs up there, including the housing piece, the all-important and critical housing piece, to make sure that people can either return safely to their own homes in due course, or for those people that need temporary emergency accommodation, that we're able to provide for that. So the work of Resilience does continue at this stage. At the moment, they're playing the most critical role in relation to evacuation centres.
There was a discussion this morning from the Acting Premier and the Acting Commissioner about the damage to infrastructure from the previous flood. So should they be playing a role in fixing that to fast track that perhaps?
Absolutely. I mean, Resilience play an important role in coordinating all government agencies to make sure that the assessments are done on all of the New South Wales state government infrastructure, but they also work really closely with the local government areas right across that region, and in fact, right across New South Wales. I mean, this particular event is currently impacting on 58 local government areas, or should I say the one from 1 month ago. And all of those local government areas and councils do interact closely with Resilience to make sure that that councils are also getting the support that they need in relation to damaged infrastructure, and that can include things like providing additional assistance with engineers to be able to go out and assess particular roads or bridges, levees, all of that sort of work. So resilience does play an important role in coordinating both New South Wales government agencies, but also that interaction with both the federal government and local government.
And the government's obviously done a lot of work since the previous floods to try and get the recovery underway. Can you give us a sense of how far this is going to set you back? Have we had any issues with motorhomes or pods? Have they been damaged?
So I'm very pleased to report that the motorhomes that were stood up in the wake of the last event, 124 of them are occupied. In relation to the 44 that were located at Lismore, they've been moved to higher ground at Alstonville, and the reports coming in through the day are that they are perfectly okay, despite the inclement weather conditions that have been experienced right across the North Coast. So in relation to the recovery efforts more generally, we will absolutely pick the ball up and keep running the second this current weather condition passes. So I'm not expecting any major setbacks on the road to recovery. Of course, we will need to, and the SES will play a big part in this. After this event passes, there will be many buildings which will have to be reassessed. So we know that in the event 1 month ago, there were a little over 20,000 building assessments, rapid building assessments conducted. That piece of work was led by the combat agency, being the SES, supported by the other emergency services organisations. There were significant damage done to thousands of buildings during that stage, and now we will need to go back in and reassess any buildings that have been inundated or perhaps damaged in some other way from wind or falling trees, etc., after this particular event concludes. So we will absolutely continue on that work. We are determined to stand with communities right across not just the Northern Rivers region, but obviously we're seeing the situation evolve on the mid-north coast and potentially other areas of New South Wales. So this just isn't all about the Northern Rivers region, although it must be accepted and appreciated that they have really borne the brunt of this, this terrible weather system that we've continued to see over the past 4 or 5 weeks now. But we as a government will stand by all of our communities to make sure that they've got the help and the support that they need to get back on track.
This is either for the Minister or the Commissioner, whoever's more suitable. Given the situation is escalating so rapidly in the Northern Rivers now, are you concerned about the capacity of some of these emergency evacuation centres to accommodate all of this?
No, I think we've got fantastic evacuation centres and resourcing in place there. And I guess one of the things we've seen is that following the last event, there's a lot of people in the community that are either already placed in emergency accommodation elsewhere. We've got around about 1,500 people in emergency accommodation elsewhere, so that takes the pressure off evacuation centres a little bit. And also with the ongoing warnings that have been, sent out relentlessly by our emergency services organisations, it has allowed people in communities to prepare a little bit more in terms of where they might position themselves at this time. But having said that, the evacuation centres are stood up and they are ready to receive people, and we don't believe at this stage that they will be overwhelmed, so to speak, that we will be able to cope with the numbers coming in. But of course, that's something that we will continue to keep a really, really close eye on, because we know that how much these communities have been through, and we know that when people arrive at an evacuation centre, they are understandably very worried about the situation and their own circumstances, and we will make sure that they are looked after.
And the Byron Bay Mayor has said it was disappointing that the community didn't receive an official severe weather warning until 5 o'clock this morning, which he says means it was too late for some people to save their cars and houses in any way by then. Do you think that Byron residents should have been informed earlier about this, or been informed about the possibility that this flash flooding could happen? And do you have anything to say to the flood victims who feel let down?
Well, I think, as has been said a few times over the last several days now, there have been numerous warnings put out to the community to expect particularly flash flooding We know that this weather system is incredibly unpredictable and rapidly evolving, and exactly where those really heavy falls land is actually really difficult to predict, and we're seeing that change hour by hour. Of course, it's really upsetting for people who have found themselves, the victims of flooding. There's no question of that. I've spent the vast majority of the last month up in the Northern Rivers region in particular, but also in Ballina and South Golden Beach and a number of other communities that have also been deeply impacted by these events over the past 5 weeks. And it will take a long time for people to really recover in themselves and also get their lives back on track. But as a government, we've got a lot of support packages in place. We're looking at that all the time, making sure that the help and assistance that we offer people really does meet their needs. I think in relation to the warnings that were issued in the last couple of days, with particular reference to Byron, I might ask the Acting SES Commissioner to make some remarks specifically about that.
Thank you, Minister. As the Minister said, we have been issuing warnings across the broader Northern Rivers for quite a number of days. We have been saying that these systems were highly dynamic and that they change exceptionally quickly, and that is ultimately what we saw last night. We need to be mindful that there are locations that receive significant rainfall totals, literally only a matter of kilometres from locations that received very little by comparison. We have been asking the community to stay aware of their surroundings and to be aware of the impending weather systems as they come. And we continue to reinforce that message now as this system continues to move south. So from my perspective, communities have been warned, communities have been spoken to, community have been worked with, and not just warned from the outside. A number of processes occur in terms of briefings through local emergency management structures and the like, to ensure that information flows through all the relevant chains, including to the community.
Minister, for residents who find themselves displaced, will there be extra motorhomes brought in?
At the moment, we're working through the housing package that we announced a few weeks ago. There's something like $285 million for rental assistance. We've got $20 million set aside for pods and similar structures, in a similar way that we rolled out in the wake of the bushfires. So the short answer to your question is yes, we will continue to source and provide where appropriate accommodation options for people who have found themselves displaced as a result of these terrible circumstances. And I very much look forward to working with the community and local government over the weeks and months ahead in my capacity as Minister for Flood Recovery, to ensure that we put people first and make sure that they have that safe roof over their heads.
And when can we start to see that roll out?
That work is underway at the moment. We've already seen the rollout of motorhomes. We've got pods on the way very, very soon. And it's really about identifying and really matching the right people with the right accommodation options. So there's that matching process that needs to occur. We're working around the clock on that. All agencies are focused on making sure that we get that work done quickly, so that we give people the certainty that they really need. Appreciating that for some people, the rebuild of their home, could be 18 months to a couple of years, depending on the availability of builders, on getting DAs through council, all of those sorts of processes which have got to be worked through. We're very, very cognizant of that and really wanting to minimise the disruption on people's lives as they, really work to get things back on track. Thank you. Very good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.